It's about protecting women's safe spaces, whether it's changing rooms, whether it's toilets in a cinema or in a leisure centre or in your kids' school, or whether it's sport. There are now moves to make sure that, well, women are going to get more fairness and more safety. Delighted to say that Kemi Badenoch, who's the Equalities and Women's Minister, has asked the Equality and Human Rights Commission to advise on changing the Equality Act. Crucially, a redefinition of sex as biological sex. So if you're born a woman, would you be enabled to go into women's-only single-sex spaces? Let's talk about this with Helen Joyce. She's author of Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality. She's also Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters. Good morning to you, Helen.
Hi, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, a good news story on a trans issue for once, and crucially, Sex Matters, the organisation you're part of, has played a very, very important role in this with a big petition to Parliament.
Yeah, we're very proud of this. So before Christmas, we launched a petition. We think that sex has always really meant biological sex in the Equality Act. We think you can't make it work otherwise. But there has been lack of clarity, and that lack of clarity needs to go in order that people can offer single-sex spaces that really are just for women. But not just single-sex spaces, associations, how you deal with equal pay claims, all these things that the Equality Act governs, they've all been messed up by this idea that if somebody gets a piece of paper from the government saying that their sex has changed, they actually move really category.
And that's been a big issue because the Equalities Act is very clear about, about sex-based difference, sex discrimination. I'm very clear, you're very clear, 95% of the population is very, very clear about what is a woman, what is a man. However, with that trans self-ID rule, and it's not just what's happened, what they were trying to bring in Scotland, but even in the rest of the country, in England in particular, we've got a situation where you say someone can be legally defined as being a woman if they've got they've been had a gender recognition certificate, and therefore be able legally to enter these spaces. Now, I've got far less of an issue with somebody who's gone through surgery and etc., being in a women's only space like a changing room or a toilet, rather than some random 6-foot bloke with a beard walking in going, oh, I'm a woman today, and walking in. And I think we all feel different about those things, but fundamentally, we need to know that women and girls are safe, whether it's a prison cell, whether it's changing rooms, girls' toilets at school and the like. So this sort of confusion, deliberate confusion between sex and your gender ID it needs to be dealt with. Now, I know that Rishi Sunak has said he's going to act on this, but we've got a lot of faith, particularly in Kemi Badenoch, because she's spoken out on this issue repeatedly. I mean, do we even need to make this change? Is it just that people are falsely interpreting the law, or does it need to be?
So there was a case before Christmas in Scotland that made it clear that we absolutely do need to the Haldane judgment. It's the interaction between the Gender Recognition Act and the Equality Act. The two of them sit very uncomfortably together. And there's a neat surgical thing you can do that I won't bore you with the details of, but anyone who likes can look up our petition and read it, that makes it clear that a trans person is protected. They have the protected characteristic of gender reassignment. We're not taking rights away from anybody with this. We're just saying that there are 9 protected characteristics. Sex means sex, and gender reassignment means gender reassignment. And on the issue of whether somebody has had surgery or not, there's no distinction in the law, and there can't be. All trans people have the same human rights, whether or not they have had surgery. So there isn't a line we can draw there.
No, and we're not saying to a man who walks into the toilet, oh, can we just have a look down your pants, please? So we're not in that position. And we don't want to be. I mean, Stonewall, the LGBT charity, I mean, let's be honest, it's a trans charity now. It's not protecting lesbian, gay people, bisexual people anymore. Why people think that trans and sexuality should be in any way related to each other, I don't understand. But Stonewall has said this move risks opening yet another chapter in a manufactured culture war that will see little benefit to women. To which I would say, we didn't start the culture war. It's not manufactured, but also it will benefit women, and maybe women should be the ones to decide what will benefit us rather than some men at Stonewall.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, if you just think of one really clear example, at the moment, if the Equality Act, sex means sex is modified by a gender recognition certificate, it would be unlawful to have an association just for lesbians. Any man with a gender recognition certificate saying he's female, a heterosexual man, suddenly turns into a lesbian and he has the right to come in too. That cannot be right. That is against people's human rights. So we have to clarify this for everybody's rights, and then we can move on to protect everybody in a logical, fair, simple simple, straightforward way.
And again, this is not in any way an attack on trans people. What this is really about is protecting women from predatory men who will exploit some of those trans laws. I mean, I was certainly in favour of a lot of those trans laws early on until I realised the implication of how they could be used against women. But this is the thing, a lot of people say, oh, this is just a culture war. This is the Tories playing politics, local elections, head of general elections next year. But I think this is a war that actually the Tories have really shied away from, and I think really shamefully shied away from while women's and girls' rights have been abused. And we know the reality of this. We've seen the cases, not just Isla Bryson, numerous cases of the rapists and sex assaulters who were going to be put into women's prisons. We've seen on lesbian dating sites, a young, 18-year-old woman coming out for the first time as gay, going on a lesbian dating site. 40% of the people on that are trans women. Men saying, well, you're a bigot and a transphobe if you're not willing to have sex with me, even though I'm quite clearly not biologically a woman. We've got, girls going into toilets. We had a girl who got injured, had to go to hospital because a boy is in the unisex toilets, kicks in the door. And all the locks have been kicked off the door at her school, we discovered, because the boys just want to go in and see them, take pictures of them on the toilet and don't have the protection of the fact there's a door that the boys are not allowed to cross because they're unisex. I mean, no one wants to go into a theatre or a changing room that's got that is unisex facilities. This is women's sport. We've seen what's happened there. This is not a cultural. This isn't some esoteric stupid debate. Right. This is really real for millions of women and girls.
And we have to praise the EHRC for doing this. I think Kishore Falconer, who is the chair of the EHRC, has been so brilliant on this issue, because it would have been so easy for her to just say it's too toxic, like loads of other people have, all the cowards. Whereas what she has said, and the EHRC was on the wrong side of this, they've looked at the law again and they've realised belatedly that they had accidentally given away women's rights. Yeah. Remember that trans people have a sex too. So one of the things they said yesterday in their letter to the government was, a trans man, so that's a woman, someone who can still get pregnant but who identifies as a man and maybe has a piece of paper saying she's a man, that person can still be discriminated against on maternity and pregnancy grounds. That person can still be discriminated against by an employer who doesn't want to hire somebody who can get pregnant. They would lose their rights. They would lose rights by being able to be registered as male. So it's not about taking rights away from trans people. In fact, for some trans people, the female ones, it'll be giving them back rights.
Very, very good point. Well, again, you and Sex Matters have just been fantastic campaigners on this. Thank you on behalf of me as a woman, my daughter, my mother, and all of the other women listening and watching right now. Thank you very much for that, Helen Joyce there from Sex Matters.